Hi, Don. Nice to meet you and finally get this chance to interview you today. And it's a pleasure of mine. And British Columbia has, a lot of energy. And since you've become the interim leader, people have a lot of questions, and they see a lot in your profile, in your background, in like the works you have done, in the bills you have presented in the Parliament. And I think a lot of people want to know a lot about you. So, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing really well, Qasim. Thank you so much for taking the time. I've been looking forward to speaking to you as well ever since we connected at the mosque. So it's a pleasure. I'm doing really well, thanks.
That's good to know. And I will start off with my first question. And in my first question, I want to know, and for my audience, who is Don Davies? How long has he been politics? What is his education? Where does he come from? Please share us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm a lawyer by training. I actually worked for a trade union for 16 years before I was elected to Parliament. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was from 1992 to 2008. And so I represented workers when they had problems at work. I represented the union at the provincial and the federal labor relations boards. I did a lot of things for the union. I did shop steward education. I lobbied the government for better transportation policy and better labor standards. So I come from a working class background, and I used my law degree basically to improve working conditions and living conditions for workers. In 2008, I was elected to Parliament. So I've been serving in Parliament for the last 17 years. I've been elected 6 times. I've been blessed to represent the good people of Vancouver Kingsway. And in that time, I've undertaken a number of roles. I've been critic for immigration. I've been critic for public safety and national security. Critic for international trade. Critic for health. And critic for finance, most recently. We can get into this in a little bit more detail, but I think as health critic for 8 years, which is a long time in politics, I was privileged to play a role in negotiating the dental care plan and the pharmacare plan for Canadians, because I believe very strongly that everybody should have access to head-to-toe public health care through our public healthcare system.
That's wonderful. So what do you think Canada is going through right now, and what is happening in the Parliament, and where do you think are the gaps you want to address as the new interim leader of the NDP?
Well, I think Canada right now is facing a time of great historical challenge and I think great opportunity. So the challenge, of course, is we've never really had to deal with such an aggressive American administration. Donald Trump has not only threatened our sovereignty, calling us the 51st state, and sometimes even implicitly threatening to annex us or use military force, but he's been very insulting to us, referring to our prime minister as a governor. He has ripped up the a trade agreement that we negotiated in good faith. He's ignoring it and using tariffs as economic weapons. And of course, Canada and the United States, we share a long border. We've had a long-standing relationship, and we have, hundreds of billions of dollars of trade and millions of jobs at stake. So we've never had to deal with such an aggressive administration. So I think there's a great challenge there. On the other hand, I think there's great opportunities. So I'm an economic nationalist. For 40 years, I have long believed that Canada is a G7 country. We should be developing our economy here, building more things in Canada, trading amongst ourselves, and diversifying our trade away from the United States as much as possible. There's a saying that it's a vulnerable business that relies on one customer.
Exactly.
And even though, because of geography and we speak the same language, same time zones, Canada and the United States will always have a profoundly important economic relationship, I've long thought that we should be reducing as much as we can our reliance on them for a day just like today. And yet the Liberals and Conservatives over the last 40 years have been pursuing greater economic integration with the Americans. And I believe that has left us very vulnerable today. So now the challenge for us is to do what I think we always should have done, which is develop our own economy, diversify our trade relationships, get more value out of our raw exports. We're still sending raw logs. We're still shipping crude oil to other countries who refine those products. And they multiply the value of these by 5, 10, 15, 20 times. I think we need to do more of that in Canada and create good jobs here. And finally, I have always believed in Canada charting an independent foreign policy, one that is based on respect for international law, one where we're a respected power on the world stage as a middle power, helping countries resolve issues peacefully. And I think with the American aggression we've seen around the world, there's an opportunity for Canada to chart a more independent path that way, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's with Russia, Ukraine, or anywhere else in the world. I think Canadians want their government to be independent and not just do what the United States wants us to do.
I fully understand that, and I will love your vision. And I think you have a trajectory that is towards ends. However, the contradictory thing that I see over here in the Canadian business environment, I see that small businesses are not being promoted. Taxes are raking up like anything, and it's like. Because you want an independent economy, what is your view on creating small businesses, giving relief to small businesses through banks and other institutions or the federal government funding, and the small cottage industry, for example?
Well, that's an excellent point. Small and medium businesses are the engine of the Canadian economy. I read a statistic recently that 98% of all businesses in Canada are small or medium enterprises, meaning they have under 500 employees. So I think we need to do a much better job in nurturing and supporting small business here. We see this happen. We have Canadian entrepreneurs, they start a business, they grow to a certain level, and then often they hit a ceiling. And they either have to sell to a foreign competitor or they relocate somewhere else. So I think that speaks to a failure of economic policy in this country going back decades. One of the reasons I'm a New Democrat, not a conservative or liberal, is I think we can do so much better. I think Canada should. We're a G7 country. We should be the wealthiest country on earth, in my opinion. What don't we have in Canada? We have land, we have food, we have every mineral and energy source there is, from uranium to oil and gas to vast amounts of wind and solar power. We have a highly educated population. We have public health care, small population, large land mass. I think the story of the Canadian economy is one of underperformance. And I think it's a good question to ask those who have been governing our country for the last 160 years, why we're not doing better than we are. So, you look at a place like Italy or Great Britain or Germany, much smaller countries with much less natural resources. And yet they are economically doing better than we are. And I don't think that should be the case. So I would like to, I really think there's an opportunity here, and I would like to focus on the Canadian economy and ask ourselves, how can we develop our own resources here? How can we, I think we need to educate our population even more. The best performing economies in the world have highly educated populations.
Exactly.
And that, you spoke of taxes, what do they say? The price of civilized societies is taxation. Small businesses should be contributing all businesses should be contributing their fair share. They use our roads. They use our water systems. They use our electricity grids. They benefit from our public education systems that provides trained employees. So we all have to be contributing to the infrastructure that we need to create our economy. but it needs to be fair
Uh-huh.
and it needs to be competitive. And I'm not sure that we've got that balance right.
I would definitely agree with you. Thanks for that answer. I've done significant research on OECD countries, G7, or all the other places where how digital economies are helping the people. My question is, for example, I've worked previously for a city government, like internationally, and our job, this one-line job, was to create disposable income for the people. I believe British Columbia can be the richest economy of Canada. You are from British Columbia.
Mhm.
I am based in British Columbia, and
Mhm.
the entire Canadian system can go with that. What do you think are the gaps and measures that you want to take in the future, and where you think that we are lacking as people, as politicians, as Canadians, and
Mhm.
your contribution as a new Democrat? What are the tangible steps that you want to take for that?
Well, that's a great question. I think the first thing is to acknowledge that we should be doing better and can be doing better. The second thing is we need to acknowledge that what we've been doing up to now has not optimized our performance. So picking up some of the themes I've said already,
Uh-huh.
I think that we need to invest more in education and training.
Uh-huh.
I was in Taiwan a few years ago.
Uh-huh.
Their tiny little island, no resources whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
20th biggest economy in the world. How do they do that?
Exactly.
Well, one thing they've done is they told me they recognize that one thing they could do to gain an advantage is to be better educated than all of their competitive countries. So I think one thing we should do is we should look at making post-secondary education,
Uh-huh.
universities, technical colleges, apprenticeships.
Uh-huh.
I think we should make the first 2 years, maybe even the first 4 years of that
Uh-huh.
free. Just like we do kindergarten to grade 12.
Uh-huh.
40, 50 years ago, people didn't finish grade 12.
Uh-huh.
So I think nowadays in the 21st century,
Uh-huh.
really having post-secondary education is almost expected now.
Uh-huh.
So I think maybe expanding our public education system
Uh-huh.
to make sure that our population is getting as highly trained as they can
Uh-huh.
is not an expenditure.
Exactly. It's
It's an investment.
Yes.
And yeah, there's an upfront cost,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know where the next Einstein's coming from. I don't know where the next Steve Jobs or Warren Buffett is coming from.
Uh-huh.
But I think that if we invest in that, I think that's something that we can do. And the second thing is, I have a bit of a challenge to Canada's entrepreneurial class.
Uh-huh.
I don't think they are taking advantage of the opportunities in Canada as much as they should.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a tendency to rely too much on the United States,
Uh-huh.
and I don't think they're taking the risks in this country. I don't think we have a really vibrant risk capital environment in this country.
Uh-huh.
I want to challenge all Canadian business people.
Uh-huh.
Invest here in Canada,
Uh-huh.
grow our economy,
Uh-huh.
and maybe there's a partnership with government
Uh-huh.
and with labor.
Uh-huh.
And that's the last thing I'll say is, when I was working with the trade union, I think Canada suffers a bit too much by confrontational labor management relations.
Uh-huh.
Enlightened economies like the Germans or the Japanese
Uh-huh.
long ago realized
Uh-huh.
that effective companies have management and workers working together.
Uh-huh.
Often good ideas can come from the shop floor about improving the work processes or finding efficiencies. We tend to have North American labor relations tends to be to fight unions and to view organized labor as a drag on competitiveness. I know in Germany, I think it's the law there that workers have a seat on the board of directors. So there's a voice at the managerial level.
Yes.
The Japanese are famous
Uh-huh.
for involving managers and workers and having cooperative
Uh-huh.
discussions
Uh-huh.
so that they can improve their workforce. So I think better labor relations, higher education skills training, and challenging Canada's business community
Uh-huh.
to take more risks
Uh-huh.
and be more entrepreneurial in our country are three key measures that I think will pay off over the short and medium and long term.
Wonderful. Next, I want to ask a very critical question. It might be of some value for you. Why is real estate one of the largest sources of revenue in Canada and for taxation, whereas I see gaps in this where I think banks should be approached? Because if you mortgage something in the US, they give you a 30-year schedule for that with a fixed interest rate. That doesn't happen in Canada. And that way, banks, financial institutions, and even federal institutions could, have a very detrimental effect on the population. And right now, because people are unable to pay their mortgages, unable to pay their rents, and what is your view in that? And how to normalize this so young people can. The secondary question is how young people can contribute to the economy, and they are unable to buy homes. What is your view on that?
Well, thank you for raising that. We just went through a federal election, and I'll tell you the number one issue I heard in that campaign of the thousands of issues in politics was affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing. There's, of all those issues, they're all important, but some are foundational. Everybody needs a place to live. Housing anchors us in community. It's what makes our ability to participate, to work, to send our children to school, to connect with community possible. So housing is an interesting commodity. It is a commodity that people buy and sell, but it's a necessity. So I think the biggest policy mistake that was made in the last 40 years was the policymakers at all levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, forgot that housing is a necessity, and they allowed it to be treated purely as a commodity. And that has really had a detrimental effect, not only on our economy, as people spend more and more of their disposable income on rent or on mortgages, but it has skewed our economy. Now I know a lot of businesses can't even find trained workers, say here in Vancouver. I told someone 20 years ago when I was first thinking of running for office, people would say, if we don't do anything, Vancouver is going to become a playground for the wealthy. And they'd say, where are our waiters and our custodians and our clean? Where are they going to live? Now, what you hear is, where are our teachers, our firefighters, our police? Where are they going to live? That shows the decline in affordable housing over that period of time. I think it's the most serious policy error made in the last 30 years. You raise the issue of long-term fixed mortgages. We used to have those in Canada. We had them up until the 1960s, where you could go get a fixed interest rate mortgage for the life of the mortgage. My parents bought their first house in Edmonton in 1962 with a 25-year fixed 6% mortgage. Now, 6% sounds high now, but at the time, in long-term interest rate, 6% is fairly standard. But once they knew their payments, they knew that those were the payments for 25 years.
Exactly.
Now, every 5 years you could renegotiate if you wanted to, but if you didn't, you could stay. Now, when their interest rates ran up in the 80s to 18 and 20%, my parents kept their home because they were paying the same mortgage every time.
Fixed.
You know who got rid of that? The banks pressured the government to get rid of that. So the Conservatives, Liberals, I'm not sure who, one of the two, did the bidding of the banks and eliminated that. The other thing I think we've done is we have allowed our domestic residential real estate market to be a commodity, an investment commodity open to the world. And I think there's been a very destabilizing impact of allowing external capital to come in and to purchase residential real estate as an investment. I don't think it's a problem if it's commercial real estate or warehouses or office towers. That's different. But when foreign capital is purchasing housing here in a place like the Lower Mainland, it raises the price because there's increased demand, and the price all of a sudden becomes unaffordable for people who live and work here. Exactly. Now, the reason I know that that's the case is it's mathematically demonstrable. Because when the price of, say, take just a single detached house, when the price of that is unaffordable to 80% of the people who live and work in this market, by definition, it must be external capital. Because the people who live and work can't afford it. So we have a serious economic issue with housing in this country. And your first comment was, I think, very troubling, which is when real estate is the number one economic activity, you know your economy is in some difficulty. Because it's not a productive, it's not necessarily a productive economic activity.
Exactly.
It's a secondary one.
It's a secondary.
Yeah. So it's people trading something that already exists as opposed to creating new. Now there's construction. There's a certain amount of economic activity that comes from construction. But the money to purchase that, the tenants that are going to occupy these office towers, that's the basis of the economy. And I think British Columbia and the rest of the country has dragged. There's a saying, Canada we're hewers of wood and drawers of water, meaning that we basically are, we're blessed with a lot of natural resources. I think that's made us lazy because it's just too easy to, as Tom Mulcair used to say, rip and ship. Rip it out of the ground and ship it off, instead of figuring out how we can get that secondary and tertiary value. During the election, I read this online. Do you remember Donald Trump? At one point he said, the United States doesn't need anything from Canada.
Yeah.
Now, he was wrong about that.
I remember that.
Empirically wrong. Of course, the United States needs a lot from Canada. But I read an American business person corrected him online, and what he said was this. He said that refineries in the United States import $100 billion of crude oil from Canada every year. And they process that into $300 billion of upper-level ethylenes, aviation fuel, gasoline, kerosene, naphtha. Then they turn that into fertilizers, plastics. So I asked myself, why are we sending $100 billion of our resource to a foreign country to get a 300% increase in value? And then they ship it somewhere else. Why are we not capturing more of that increase in value here? And look at the jobs you're talking about. Engineering jobs, technicians jobs, marketing jobs. There's value there, that, leaving aside the environmental aspects. And I think Canada has been doing that for many, many decades, and that we're not reaching our potential. It's time to change that.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more that it's a wonderful overview of that, and I hope other parliamentarians also get to think the same way. Due to shortage of time, I will just have two more questions with you, and because you have a meeting, and I don't want to hold you back. And thank you for adjusting some time for me.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Are you planning in the parliament to actually raise the question that would address this issue for the banks, for the interest rate, so they can have a term loan at fixed prices for 25, 30 years, just like you mentioned for your parents, just like something that used to happen in Canada? And if not, will you be using the National Bank as a vehicle or some other federal infrastructure bank for the same purpose, in which, it's just an idea. Maybe you can float some revenue on that and create a revenue engine for the Canadian National Bank in that case. Absolutely.
New Democrats will raise those issues. We have been raising those issues and will continue to. We see a role for the federal government to play a major role in addressing the affordable housing crisis in this country. They're the major source of revenue. It's the senior level of government. And we take the position that the market will not be able to provide secure, dignified, affordable housing for everybody. The market does a lot of wonderful things, but what it does is it maximizes profit. That's what it should do. What it does not do is make sure every single Canadian, whether you're a senior or someone living with a disability or a single mother with children or a student, it does not make sure that those people have affordable housing. So that's where the federal government must step in with creative solutions. And we used to do that. Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation used to have a dual mandate. They insured mortgages, which they still do, and they used to build social housing. The Liberals stopped that second mandate in 1992. So basically for what's that, 33 years, an entire generation, the federal government has been absent from building social housing. We need them to get back into that. They need to be building co-ops, financing co-ops. They need to be building low-income housing, housing for seniors. And we know that Canadians are aging. We need to be thinking 20, 30 years down. Housing for students on universities, housing for people with disabilities. And when you build those housing, 30, 40, 50,000 units a year, you're not only providing affordable housing, but you're reducing the demand that's present in the private market. So that should reduce prices a bit. And also with creative financing proposals like the one that you mentioned about fixed term mortgages for the life of the mortgage. We've done it before. We should be doing it again. And the only way that's going to happen, though, is if the federal government decides to. And so far, I'm disappointed. The throne speech that came out with Mr. Carney never mentioned non-market housing, never mentioned social housing, never mentioned cooperative housing. It did mention affordable housing, but I think if the Liberals and Conservatives continue to believe that the private market will provide an answer to the housing crisis, I'm afraid we're going to be in for deep trouble, because for the last 30 years, the evidence is there for all to see. The private market is unable to do that without creative policies from government. And that's where government needs to step in. The market does wonderful things. They provide wonderful choice in consumer goods. But you know what it won't do? It won't make sure that everybody's educated. It won't make sure that everybody's housed. It won't make sure that everybody has access to private health care or public health care, pardon me. This is the role of government. Exactly. And that's where I think Canadians want to see their tax dollars used wisely to fill those gaps that the private market, which is doing what they're supposed to do, maximizing profit, is incapable or unable to do. So New Democrats will continue to voice that perspective in Parliament.
Thank you. Well, wonderfully articulated, and I think it gives people more clarity on the subject. Conservatives, I heard them say, being very anti-immigration, and I just calculated it. I mean, international cities around the world have so much population as in all of Canada. So 1 million people can't hurt the economy. And I believe they are educating their people wrong, because we don't have a business environment, a conducive business environment. Nothing is affordable. We can't compete with anybody. And what is your perspective on this? This was my view. And I mean, what do you think is the case? Are they educating their people wrong? I mean, 1 million immigrants, would they destroy Canada?
Well, it's interesting. Canada is a nation of immigrants. I mean, other than, of course, our indigenous peoples, indigenous nations, every single person, me, you, everybody else who's come here, whether it's us, our parents, our grandparents, or great-grandparents, we're immigrants. And I think it's commonly understood that it's been immigration that has led to the success of the Canadian economy and Canadian society. I think we're a model of the world, particularly in the way that we're multicultural as a society, and we have managed to invite people from every corner of the world. We live together in harmony. We enjoy and respect and celebrate different cuisines, different languages, different traditions, different heritage, and we do so in a model, I think, of social harmony. So immigration policy, I think, is critical. It's been critical to our past. It's critical to our present. It's critical to our future. But what we have to do is we need to have, I think, a smart immigration policy. I personally think that the Canadian society, that we should have a long-term plan with long-term population goals. We're 40 million today. I think we should probably be 70, 75, 80 million by the end of the century. And that would put us on par with countries like the UK, Germany, Italy, France, who are all in the 60 to 90 million population. Because what happens then is you create a strong domestic market. And I think that's also an important key to Canada's economic future. We're a trading country. But a lot of that is we don't have a big enough domestic market so that Canadian businesses can survive and prosper simply by serving the Canadian market. So that requires us having a long-term plan. I think where the Conservatives and Liberals got it wrong is they relied too much on temporary foreign workers and too much on international students, because both of them, they viewed them as people to exploit, as opposed to viewing immigrants as key partners in building our nation. So temporary foreign workers, they come, they work for 3 years, and I think the reason business likes them is they keep wages low.
Exactly.
Because if you didn't have temporary foreign workers coming in, to get people here to work on those jobs, they probably would have to raise the wages and working conditions. And with international students, first of all, international students are wonderful on our campuses. We should always be welcoming to students all over the world. They add so much to our campuses. But the Liberals and Conservatives have treated international students as money machine, ATM machines, because of the differential fees they pay.
Exactly.
UBC, a Canadian student pays $6,000 a year for an arts program. It's $40,000 a year for an international student. And so I think that they've got the balance wrong. So what we need to do is have a long-term plan for rational immigration growth, and we need to be, I think, welcoming people to this country who have a long-term stake in being here, in occupations and with skill sets that are important to build our economy. That's the base. That's been the basis of the Canadian immigration system for the last 120 years. You know, my grandparents on my mother's side came here from Hungary in the 1920s. Why? Because they were trying to populate Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba with people who had who were prepared to farm. So my grandparents came from farming villages in Hungary. And by the way, when we talk about supporting immigrants, my grandfather was given 160 acres free from the Canadian government. All he had to do was clear it within a certain period of time. And so when people say, oh, we're supporting refugees too much, well, we've always, imagine giving an immigrant today 160 acres of land somewhere.
That's a lot of land.
That's a lot of land. So we've always used immigration policy and incentives to develop our economy. And that was done wisely. So, you know, I think the Conservatives and Liberals have not done a good job. And the risk they have there is it creates anti-immigrant sentiment.
Exactly.
Which is dangerous to our social cohesion and unfair. Unfair.
Exactly.
Because immigrants, every immigrant to this country is a benefit, and we should be welcoming them. They're not the cause of problems at all. In fact, I think they're key to our economic future.
Look at the U.S. You know, like all immigrants. I mean, even NASA has about 90,000 employees. 70% are immigrants.
Well, you know, with our birth rate is declining for a long time in Canada. The demographic picture is that we're not replacing our population. And so 100% of the growth in our population and therefore economy has to come from immigration. So getting that policy right is important. So having a smart, you know, how hard is it to have a fair, fast, efficient, and effective immigration policy? You know, we're here in my office here in Vancouver Kingsway. I joke, I don't have a community office. I have an immigration law practice because people are coming to my office all the time. Visas denied. People want to bring their relatives from, you know, from home for a wedding in the summer. Visas are denied. Employers are trying to bring cooks and staff from other countries. Their labor market advisory opinions are rejected. Our system is bad. And that's another thing I think we have to lay at the feet of Conservatives and Liberals. They've been in power for the last 40 years. So if our immigration system's not working well, why is that? It's because they haven't put the resources or thought into it. And New Democrats want to do our part to have a fast, fair, effective immigration policy, because we think it's key to not only Canada's economic future, but our social cohesion. One last thing I want to mention is the most successful immigration class is the family class.
Exactly.
And that makes sense, right? If people are here and they're bringing family members, they have a built-in support network. Usually it helps get their jobs. They live together. parents help with childcare. Yet, the family class is limited to your parents and your children. It doesn't include your brothers or sisters. It doesn't include your aunts or uncles or your cousins. I think that should change. I think we should broaden the definition of family class so that you could sponsor maybe your brother or your sister if you wanted to, or your aunt or your uncle. You're not just limited to your parents and your children. And that's very successful, because if your brother or sister comes here, I'm making it up, I don't know if you have a brother or sister that's in a different country. If they wanted to come here, they have your support and assistance. And so these are little innovations that
wonderful. I think it
should
be a big support to everybody. I mean, I'm really happy to hear this.
Yeah. These are things that I think can and should be done. And in my 17 years in Parliament, I've been proposing these for years and years, and the government hasn't worked out. So, put it this way: if people don't like the immigration system right now, they've got to quit electing the people who have created it and refuse to make the investments and innovations necessary to change it.
May I ask one more question?
Of course.
If it's okay. I just want to know that there's a very huge problem for immigrants. I'm an immigrant as well, and you are one as well. But you see, there's something Canada is not realizing. The government is not realizing. For example, I'm an engineer. There's a Washington Accord signed in 1970. Canada is signatory to that. Based on that, engineering professionals, doctors should immediately plug into the society as doctors and engineers. Where is the hiccup, and why have we given them more hard work to actually do to qualify for that?
Your questions are really so excellent, because they're piercing the heart of I think a lot of key economic problems. When I first ran for office in 2007, that's when I first started. I was elected in 2008, but the campaigning started before that. It's almost 20 years ago. The lack of recognition of foreign credentials was a burning issue then. Doctors, engineers, architects, teachers, lawyers trained in other countries come to Canada unable to practice. Not only is that unfair to them, but it actually is a serious drag on our economy. Why wouldn't we be trying to get highly trained people to work as soon as they can in Canada, practicing the skill sets that they're trained for? Not only that, but it's perverse, because when you apply to come to Canada as an immigrant, they give you points.
Exactly.
For having this training and education.
This qualification.
Absolutely. So we encourage people to come here. We recognize their talents.
That you are an engineer, you're a doctor.
Exactly. And then we come in and we say you can't practice. Now, it's a complicated problem, but I refuse to concede that there's no solution. One of the problems is that in the Canadian Constitution, the regulation of professions is left to the provinces. So each province, we have 10 different provinces and 3 territories, all who are controlling the practice in those professions. And then you have very powerful professional organizations that are trying to control, I think, they're trying to control entry into the profession because it protects their economic interests. I'm a lawyer, so I can say that. I know law societies, medical associations, colleges, College of Architecture, dentistry. It used to be that dentists would not allow a dentist trained anywhere to practice in Canada unless you were trained in Canada. You could be trained in the UK, or you could have gone to Harvard and come to Canada and you couldn't practice.
Don't you think
it's changed now, by the way, but
it affects? What if Canadians go to other countries and they ask them that, okay, fine, you're Canadian, we don't accept your education. And this is something a lot of countries are discussing right now.
Absolutely. Well, it's unwise and it's unfair. Now, look, there are some factors we have to keep into account. One is we have to make sure that people can speak English or French to an acceptable degree. If there's a surgeon trained in Nigeria,
Uh-huh.
and they're in an operating room in Vancouver,
Uh-huh.
obviously they'll have to understand the terminology.
Exactly.
And second, there's a certain amount of protection of the public.
Uh-huh.
So there should be a process for quick evaluation to make sure. But here's my idea. I've proposed this before. Why doesn't Canada use its federal treaty-making power to negotiate treaties with other countries? We do that with goods and services. So we'll sign a free trade agreement with, say, South Korea to facilitate goods and services.
Exactly.
So cars produced in Korea can be shipped here, come to the Vancouver docks, shipped to the dealership, no problem. Why can't we do the same thing for credentials? Why can't Canada and the Korean government sit down and say, let's recognize the top universities, colleges, technical training skills in each country that we agree? Like, you can't tell me that the best universities in South Korea are not world class. They, of course, every country has a world-class institution. So start with the low-hanging fruit. Recognize the places we all agree have top-notch training, and say, we will automatically recognize the credentials of graduates of those programs. Then you say to the provinces here, you need to sign on to that. You know, in the last election, getting rid of intra-provincial trade barriers, big issue. Well, one of the biggest inter-provincial trade barriers is professional credential recognition. So we've got to use the moment now to say to every province, you got to sign on to the federal government. If you're a doctor and you're a graduate from the best university in Pakistan, the best university in Belgium, best one in Nigeria, if as long as you can pass the English language or French language training, we will facilitate your practicing in this country as soon as possible. And I think that's key. The lack of action on this is inexcusable. There's you know, the joke used to be the best place to have a heart attack in Vancouver was in the backseat of a taxi cab. You know, because chances of the guy being a cardiologist was high. You know, this is an age-old problem that has taken too long to fix, and I believe there are solutions.
Wonderful talking to you, Don. And I think if you have a message from as the leader of the NDP, here is your moment. Please tell us what message you want to give as the leader of the NDP, Don Davies.
Well, you know, I think this last election showed us that Canadians don't want to have a US-style two-party system. I think the strength of Canadian democracy is our diversity of views. And so, you know, we have 5 parties in Parliament right now. The New Democrats, we had a tough election this time. I think the reason for that is people were afraid of Donald Trump. Quite honestly, a lot of Canadians did not want a Pierre Poilievre government. So a lot of New Democrat supporters, progressive voters, parked their vote temporarily with the Liberals. And that's why Mr. Carney won government. So my message to all those progressive people is come back to the New Democrats. We've had 2 parties run this country since 1867. It's been liberal, conservative, liberal, conservative, conservative. If we want true change, then we need to have a different approach. And, you know, the New Democrats, we right now are engaging in a process of examining how we can have a reimagined vision of Canada and government for the 21st century. One where we do better. You know, one where every Canadian reaches their potential, where we build a strong domestic economy, where the prosperity of this very wealthy country is shared more equally among people. I would like to say, let's demand better. Let's not accept the kind of country that we have here with all the problems. Let's demand better, and join me and my New Democrat colleagues in helping to build a better, another political option for people that I think can produce a society and a country that is more peaceful, more prosperous, more equal, more fair for everyone. And that's the New Democrat message.
Thank you, Don Davies. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you, Qasim.
And I'm really impressed with your candor and your humbleness, and you're highly accessible. I didn't even know that. So I hope to meet you again with some more questions. And till then, thank you very much.
Anytime. It's a real pleasure. Thank you for your time. And, the essence of democracy is an informed electorate. And I want to thank you for taking the time out of your life to ask such penetrating questions and to share this information with voters, because at the end of the day, in a democracy, it's only as strong as the participation and involvement of citizens. So thank you for your role in helping to produce that.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks.
Pleasure is mine.